A major policy change from Donald Trump. Turkey will be allowed to launch an operation against Kurdish forces in Syria. Kurdish fighters, key allies in defeating so-called Islamic State, accuse the US of stabbing them in the back. As US troops in Syria begin to withdraw, President Trump says it's time for the US to get out of these ridiculous, endless wars. The White House says Turkey will take over responsibility for IS fighters captured by Kurdish forces. We'll have the latest from Washington as Trump loyalists savage the move. Also on Global, sex for grades, serious allegations against two of West Africa's prestigious universities. A BBC undercover investigation reveals sexual harassment of female students on campus. And thousands of activists worldwide begin a 2-week campaign of disruption, demanding action on climate change. This is Global. Hello and welcome to the programme. It is a major policy change from Donald Trump. The US is stepping aside to allow Turkey to launch an operation against Kurdish-led forces in Syria. Up to now, Kurdish fighters have been a key US ally in defeating so-called Islamic State. Kurdish groups say they're being abandoned. President Trump has tweeted, "It's time for the US to get out of these ridiculous, endless wars." But anger has been growing in Washington, with a number of Trump loyalists scathing about this move.
American forces on the move in northern Syria, withdrawing from observation posts close to the Turkish border. When Turkish troops move in, the Americans will not stand in their way. This moment has been coming for months. Donald Trump would like to get out of Syria altogether. But even though this is a limited move, the thought of what happens next is causing alarm. Turkish forces are getting ready to move in. They plan to drive Syrian Kurds away from the border. The White House has given them a green light. Turkey will soon be moving forward, says the White House, with its long-planned operation. United States forces will not support or be involved in the operation. US forces, having defeated ISIS, will no longer be in the immediate area. Local Kurds have relied on American support for more than 4 years. Now they sense betrayal, watching in dismay as the Americans left, sensing they could soon be at war with Turkey. No, says the poster, to the Turkish occupation of our land. Kurdish fighters, backed by the West, fought and defeated so-called Islamic State. The last IS stronghold, Baghouz, fell in March. For Donald Trump, that spelled job done. "We will fight where it is to our benefit," he tweeted this morning, "and only fight to win. Turkey, Europe, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Russia and the Kurds will now have to figure the situation out." How far does the Turkish leader intend to go? He says he wants a safe zone in northern Syria, and he gave some indication at the UN last month. This morning he said the operation was about to begin.
There is always a phrase we say, "We can come any night without warning." And our determination remains, because it is absolutely out of the question for us to further tolerate the threats from these terrorist groups.
Mr. Erdogan says he wants to settle as many as 2 million Syrian refugees inside the safe zone, a little over half the number currently sheltering in Turkey. And there's the question of what happens to captured IS fighters being held by the Kurds. Washington says Turkey will now be responsible. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, this is a developing story. We'll be live in Washington to get the very latest from there. Very interesting that key Republicans like Lindsey Graham has been tweeting, Nikki Haley also tweeting. So we'll have stabilising it is for the region. Well, actually, we have Gary O'Donoghue in Washington in our bureau now. And Gary, I was just saying there that both Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley have been tweeting in the last little while, and it's pretty damning stuff in terms of this Trump move.
Yes, it is. I mean, bear in mind, Lindsey Graham is an absolute ally of the president. He backs him on everything. He's been incredibly strong on the impeachment process. But He has said, in terms of this withdrawal, that it's irresponsible, that it's impulsive, that it should be reversed. He's used some pretty strong language. And Nikki Haley, the former US ambassador to the UN, you remember she resigned last year, she's gone even further. She's talked about we've got to have the backs of our allies if we want them to have our backs. We cannot leave the Kurds to die, as she put it on Twitter. Really, really strong stuff. And I think there's some concern here that if the president goes through with this, and bear in mind he has sort of vacillated on this before, Matthew, back in December last year, you'll remember, he threatened this withdrawal. James Mattis, the Secretary of Defence, then resigned. He seemed then to hesitate and not go through with the complete withdrawal. But this time he seems more serious. And I think if that invites Turkey into northern Syria there to take on the YPG, the Kurdish forces, certainly people like Lindsey Graham and one of his Democrats.
Some of the words that Lindsey Graham used, he talked about the possibility of IS coming back. He talked about perhaps Kurdish forces realigning with the Assad government, destroying Turkey's relationship with the US Congress. It'll be a stain on America's honour. Just some of the things that Lindsey Graham has been saying. There's also...
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, they've been working on this process. And it has taken a long time of some kind of safe zone, a sort of buffer zone, if you like, along the northern border, the northern Syrian border with Turkey there. You know, you're talking, we don't have a map up, but we're talking east of the Euphrates River and a sort of 400-kilometre strip, maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometres wide, to keep the Kurds and the Turks apart, and to give some sort of place for Syrian refugees in Turkey to return to, potentially. Those negotiations have really gone nowhere, and that's why the Americans, according to Donald Trump, are getting out of the way, because they fear they'll get caught up in the middle of this fight between the Turkish forces and the Kurds. And of course, there's the whole question there of also IS prisoners in that area. The Americans say it's up to the countries where they're from to take them back, but they're going to be in the middle of all this as well. So it's a really, really dangerous situation there right now.
OK, Gary O'Donoghue, thanks for the latest there from Washington. As I said a moment ago, we'll talk to Jeremy Bowen here in the next few minutes. We'll also talk to the Syrian Defence Force on today's programme. All of that coming up here in a moment or two. Well, before that, an American businesswoman controversially linked to Boris Johnson when he was London mayor has refused to say whether she had an intimate relationship with him. Jennifer Arcuri joined trade missions led by Mr Johnson and received thousands of pounds in public money, raising questions over whether he'd failed to declare a conflict of interest over their relationship. Boris Johnson has insisted everything was done entirely in the proper way. Here's Helen Catt.
Productive.
When then Mayor of London Boris Johnson agreed to speak at her events, young tech entrepreneur Jennifer Arcuri was overjoyed.
I'm ready to hang out.
Yeah, look at that! Boris is hanging out!
He ended up being the star attraction at several.
You like hanging out with us, right?
I do. I'm always gassed.
She and her start-up business took part in a number of trade missions run by City Hall and received public funds while he was in post. Speaking to ITV's Good Morning Britain earlier, Jennifer Arcuri denied their friendship had earned her preferential treatment.
Boris never, ever gave me favoritism. Never once did I ask him for a favour. Never once did he write a letter of recommendation for me. He didn't know about my asking to go to trips.
Ms Arcuri said Mr Johnson had become a really good friend and that he'd visited her at her office in her flat in East London 5, 10, a handful of times. She refused to answer questions questions over whether or not there had been a more intimate relationship.
Because the press have made me this objectified ex-model pole dancer, I really am not going to answer that question.
So you won't deny it?
I'm sorry. I'm not going to be putting myself in a position for you to weaponize my answer.
No, I get it.
I'm being used as a pawn.
The London Assembly is investigating Boris Johnson's links with Ms Arcuri. Its code of conduct says holders of public office should act solely in terms of the public interest. They should not do so in order to gain financial or other benefits for themselves, their family or their friends. And they should declare any private interests.
How are you doing?
On a visit to a hospital in Watford earlier, Boris Johnson was asked if he thought he'd broken it.
No, and I've said, I think, everything I'm going to say on that matter.
The London Assembly still have questions.
We want him to set out all of his dealings with Ms Arcuri, and we also want him to explain this whole issue around declarations. You know, what did he do? Was due diligence done?
Boris Johnson has previously said he will cooperate with the London Assembly's investigation, although he thought they were barking up the wrong tree. Yet another challenge then for the Prime Minister at the start of yet another crucial week. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, a crucial week indeed, because the British Prime Minister is calling his European counterparts today to try to rally support for his latest Brexit proposals, with just 10 days to go before that crucial EU summit. The French President Emmanuel Macron has told him the EU will decide by the end of this week whether a deal will be possible. Now let's take a look at the day's other main global stories. And a US appeals court has granted President Trump a temporary stay of a decision after a federal court judge rejected his request to block publication of his tax returns. Manhattan's district attorney wants to publish 8 years' worth of documents. During the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump declined to publish all of his tax returns, something other presidential candidates have done routinely. The consumer goods company Unilever, which owns brands like Persil, Domestos and Dove, says it will halve the amount of plastic used in its packaging by 2025. Its products are on sale in 190 countries, and it currently produces 700,000 tonnes of plastic every year. Now, scientists think they've managed to date a massive flare that originated from the centre of the Milky Way. Have a look at these pictures. This is an artist's impression of the so-called sifter flare, which some scientists claim ripped through the galaxy 3.5 million years ago in the middle of a massive black hole. So as promised, let's return to our main story, the major change in US foreign policy. The White House saying Turkey will be moving forward with its long-planned operation into northern Syria. Kurdish forces, a US ally in that fight against so-called Islamic State, say they'd been stabbed in the back.
Because the Kurds in that part of Syria have been the allies of the United States, and it's no exaggeration to say that the war against Islamic State could not have been fought and won without what they did on the ground. So, yeah, it is a massive stab in the back for those people.
The president is saying, it is time to bring these endless, ridiculous wars to a close. That was his tweet from only a few hours ago. President Erdogan talked about setting up a safe zone. Just go through what is the key concern here.
Well, first off, President Trump, endless wars. Endless wars from his perspective in the White House, perhaps, but wars that may actually flare up and get worse again because of what he's doing. Islamic State was the caliphate since the beginning of the war in Syria, different sorts. What he's got in mind is a zone that makes Turks safer, because he regards all of the Kurdish fighters there as terrorists, including those who were allies of the United States and other Western countries in the fight against so-called IS. So he is hoping to take this land, get rid of the Kurdish fighters from within it, and perhaps put large numbers of Syrian refugees back into the country, out of Turkey, in that place. And of course there are some, even though there are quite a lot of Arab areas in there.
Thousands and thousands of refugees that currently are in this area. The White House has been clear that if this plan goes ahead, Turkey would be responsible for IS fighters who've been captured. Again, what sort of problems do you envisage in that whole area?
Well, there are, the numbers held are in the thousands. So this is potentially, again, another dangerous thing. What if they got out? What if they were able to start picking up weapons again? Have the Turks agreed to do that? I mean, there are lots of questions that are... It could have been the quid pro quo for getting the US to stand aside while they went in to do this. So what we're talking about is a real changing of the guard in that part of Syria, and a great potential for instability in what is further instability in what is already a very, very fragile part of the world.
Well, that's where I wanted to end. Just a twin final thought. Your assessment in terms of how destabilising a move like this will be. We had Lindsey Graham only a short while ago talking about one of the potentials was the danger of a realignment with Kurdish fighters, perhaps even siding with the Assad regime.
It would not be a massive step for them to move more in that direction. And if they're dumped by the Americans, and if the Turks come in looking to try to dangerous as a result of this than it was yesterday.
All right, Jeremy Bowen, thanks very much for that assessment. Thank you. Now, still to come on today's programme from...
who were relishing their freedom. They believe everything's going to be different from now on. They think their country will be respected in the world once more, as it used to be before Slobodan Milosevic took power.
The Dalai Lama, the exiled spiritual leader of Tibet, has won this year's Nobel Peace Prize.
As the parade was reaching its climax, 2 grenades exploded, and a group of soldiers jumped from a military truck taking part in the parade and ran towards the president, firing from Kalashnikov automatic rifles.
After 437 years, the skeletal ribs of Henry VIII's tragic warship emerged. But even as divers worked to buoy her up, the Mary Rose went through another heart-stopping drama.
I want to be the people's governor. I want to represent everybody. I believe in the people of California.
Welcome back. The sexual harassment of female students in universities, well, that is a global issue. For the past year, BBC Africa Eye has been investigating the situation in West Africa. They interviewed dozens of victims and sent journalists undercover, posing as students to secretly record men who sexually harass women inside 2 of the region's most prestigious institutions, the University of Lagos and the University of Ghana. Well, let's get more with Mayani Jones, who's in Lagos for us. And Mayani, how disturbing is what the BBC investigation has found here?
Incredibly disturbing, Matthew. It took the Africa Eye team over a year to gather some of the evidence featured in the report. They spent 9 months carrying out investigative research and then sent undercover investigative reporters to both universities to gather some secret filming. It shows that the culture of sexual harassment in both universities is very widespread and that it often goes without impunity. Now, before we start this report, I should warn you that some of the images in Kiki Modi's report contain...
I was a happy girl, just floating through life.
At 19, I got into one of Nigeria's best universities, but it was nothing like I imagined. One of my lecturers demanded to have sex with me in exchange for my exam results. I refused.
Never ever imagined that I would be a victim. Unprovoked. I didn't do anything.
The harassment forced me to drop out. For more than a year, Africa Eye has been investigating sexual harassment. In Nigeria, we focused on University of Lagos, or UNILAG, and a local pastor. We sent an undercover journalist to meet him, posing as a 17-year-old student below the legal age of consent, seeking a...
Yeah, lecturers, when they take girls, they take them up there to go and smooch them. Romance them.
Eh? They'll take them to do...
To smooch, touch their breast, touch out their head.
Jesus.
It's a club. So they call it the cold room.
The footage we captured also showed physical harassment.
Sir?
No, sit down, sit down, sir. I don't want this car. Come close.
Sir, I'm getting the... I'm getting the cold room idea.
Come close, come close.
Okay.
Sit down. Sit well.
It's okay.
My baby. My big baby. No, wait. That's what I want to do. I'm not going to harm you. Okay, sir.
Is that released her? UNILAG told us it dissociates itself from the alleged behavior.
Well, the response on social media to this report has been absolutely massive. It's trended in both Nigeria and Ghana all day, and it was also one of the top 5 trends on Twitter throughout the day. There's been a huge outcry, loads of people sharing their experiences of sexual harassment at university, and we've just...
Have a look at these pictures. They're from Sydney, where protesters marched and staged a sit-in on one of the main roads in the city. In the New Zealand capital, Wellington, activists surrounded the government building that gives out oil and gas drilling permits. Well, there have been demonstrations here in London and also in Berlin, and our reporters Dan Johnson and Jenny Hill sent reports from both cities.
This is one of Berlin's busiest, if not the busiest junction in the city. Today, you're not going to drive a car through here. Hundreds all week. They've come prepared. There are sleeping bags, ground mats and so on. And they say they want to stay here because they want to change government policy. They think this is such an important issue that they're prepared, many of them, to be arrested if it comes to that.
The main streets around Trafalgar Square are closed, and that is a deliberate strategy to target these high-profile sites. If you look around here, you can see the protesters have parked a trailer, and there are actually demonstrators who are laid underneath that, currently refusing to move. This is a peaceful protest, but it's deliberately disrupted.
From a different part of the city, and you can see just the amount of people there at just one of the junctions, one of the bridges there across the Thames. And let me show you also pictures of the scene in Berlin as well, and the police there have not made any arrests, a number of arrests in different parts, in different demonstrations across the world. But those are some of the latest pictures on that story. More on the programme here, the headlines coming up in a moment or two.
Hello. As we fly into Europe on our latest satellite sequence, you can very clearly pick up an area of low pressure dominating the scene for the northwest of Europe at the moment, and also this low sitting in the centre of the Med, which is causing some quite significant problems in terms of heavy rainfall and strong and squally winds. By Tuesday, some of that heavier rainfall will be pushing away eastwards. The low stays to the northwest, but the fronts start to sink across into Scandinavia, France, Germany and the Low Countries. Some wet weather, I think, on the way for parts of Turkey and Greece on Tuesday. The winds falling much lighter, though, across the Balkans and clearing skies for Italy. Still got a lot of warmth across Iberia for the next few days, above average temperatures in Madrid. Looking pretty wet, though, for Paris and Frankfurt on Tuesday. Lots of showers and strong winds across the UK. Pretty chilly for Scandinavia through the next few days. You can see weather fronts try and push in here, but the cold air is fairly locked in place. We will, though, start to see a front getting across towards western Russia, bringing some wetter conditions into Moscow for the coming days. Looking pretty unsettled across the heart of Europe in the middle part of the week, maybe with some snow for the Alps. But brighter skies return to Paris, along with a little warmth by the time we get to Friday and Saturday. Elsewhere, the rain looks fairly set in for Moscow, even through until the end of the weekend.
The BBC